council members.
Well, I don't know. We can even set up. So he must come be here.
Oh, okay.
We actually heard through the course of the day that they were planning on getting there at 6:30. We reminded them of this, and then it's not sure what it was going to happen.
Okay.
I'll get it back to the sergeants. There needs to be a conversation.
Okay, everyone. We're going to begin now. This is a public discussion concerning the Waldo Canyon Fire After Action Report. I don't think I need to tell anyone that's here about the stress and challenges of that week, and it was a tough event for everyone. I'll just reiterate things that I'd said after the fire in a city council meeting, that it's always difficult decisions that have to be made when you're reviewing such data relative to such an event and trying to make proper and well-informed decisions about putting people on evacuation notice, working with all the right people to that we can make the right decisions. So it's always a tough time. Citizens of Woodland Park, I think, did an outstanding job throughout that week, and I couldn't ask more from a community. I'll just go ahead and reiterate also the great teamwork that we had between the city. The staff had a really great emergency action plan in place, people that knew how to execute things. It was great in the way we worked with the Teller County Sheriff's Office, Mike Insminger, the sheriff, being our incident commander in Teller County for the fire, with Chief Tyler Lambert from Northeast Teller Fire, and the way we worked as a team on that. We had some things laid out as we went into the event and executed those right away, but as you can imagine, technology and everything is this. We made some changes, made some adjustments, and what we've tried to do is record those things that we think we can do better, and also those things that we saw that we did later in the week that we would, if in case of any other kind of emergency, that we would want to implement at the very beginning. And some of that has to do with communications. I'll just say, as mayor, I really appreciate the leadership that David Buddy, our city manager, took on this, and working with the staff, bringing information together. I had a pile of notes about yay big from the fire and went through and pieced things together. They then presented me with their draft. I added some things, tweaked some things, and the AAR that was published was as a result of that. So I'm going to turn it over to our city manager, David Buttery, to lead our discussions tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited that you're here. I had absolutely no idea what kind of turnout we would have this evening. We invited a couple of people. I'm just excited that you're all here. We are video streaming this, so hopefully folks that couldn't make it out this evening have a chance to see it at home via their computer screen. And through the course of the evening, we are going to be able to receive questions from the council, from the audience here, and also from our listening audience by virtue of great technology. They'll email questions to Suzanne, who will forward them to Cindy, who will send them to me, who then I will do my best to answer them. It's not efficient, but it's going to work. I want to say special thanks to Tyler Lambert, the fire chief from Northeast Teller County Fire Protection District. He's here this evening to help me answer the really tough technical questions. I see Search and Rescue here. Thank you very much for being here, Mike. And Norm Steen, one of our newly elected county commissioners, is here as well. So thank you very much for being here. The value of an after-action report is to celebrate the things that you did well, but it's also significantly and more so important to learn what we can do better the next time. I expect we'll hear some positive comments tonight. I expect we'll hear some negative comments tonight, but I want those negative comments to be given in the form of a critique so that we can use those to improve what we did. We'll accept input in any format. If we have input for the after action review that's not in here, we'll create an addendum and make that part of the record. The format of the after action report, and we do have a few copies in the back, it was quite simply a federal format. We chose to follow that. There's an executive summary. There's a minute-by-minute accounting of the activities from June 23rd all the way through July 2nd. Then there's the process of reviewing what are termed capabilities and strengths and weaknesses. And it's in the strengths that we celebrate, and it's in the weaknesses that we will learn. Many of the weaknesses we're already in the process of correcting. Each staff component has a portion of this that they will be working on, so that should we be faced with a disaster like this again, regardless of the type, whether it's a fire, a gasoline spill, a hurricane, a tornado, or an earthquake, we'll be able to respond. If it's a hurricane,
we're in trouble.
We are. I'd like to very quickly just review the components of the executive summary. I don't intend to present the entire report. I would much rather hear council's comments and the audience's comments so that we can move through this. It is on our website. It's on Facebook. There are many places to find this document. I do want to, before I begin though, it was a staff project. All of our staff compiled notes, and over the course of several months, they presented those to me. We fussed and cussed about them, and I pulled up my records and went through everything and then presented a draft to the mayor as he said. So my appreciation for these 4 key staff members that were involved in the fire. Other staff members were involved, but these 4 sitting at the table, from our fire chief, public works director, utilities director, and of course our city clerk, were key in the execution of the plans associated with this document, and therefore it was key that I get their input, and from that input we learned a significant amount. The 3 things that we think went extremely well were interagency cooperation. You heard the mayor mention that. Primarily with Teller County, the Teller County Sheriff's Office, and Northeast Teller County Fire Protection District. There was constant communication between all of those entities. We also had significant coordination and cooperation with RE2 School District and their superintendent, and also the UPass Ambulance District. The second thing that I think went extremely well was the evacuation of the east side of Woodland Park. It was a coordinated effort, again, led by our police chief, receiving assistance from Northeast Teller County, for the Teller County Sheriff's Office. There were also some state patrol troopers who were passing through, saw us doing this, and jumped in and helped. So there were 2 state patrol cruisers who, by happenstance, came on and helped us out. So I was extremely pleased that we were able to evacuate effectively 1/3 of the city in about 2.5 hours. And a huge thanks to our citizens. We really didn't have any issues. People did not argue. People did not try to object. If they objected or argued, we just moved on. So again, great thanks to the citizenry, because they knew the significance of this. Many of them had been through the Hayman fire, and that was too close for comfort, and this one was even worse. The other thing that went extremely well was the use of technology, myriad technology. Smartphones, Nixle, taking pictures and sending them straight to our emergency operations center from the top of Motel X Hill. Just great technology. Reverse 911, simple things, our electronic message signs, our variable message signs that are portable, maps that we're able to print off here and at other locations that we could post at Bergstrom Park. All of those things are what I consider technology advancements that we didn't necessarily have during the Hayman fire. Here's the top 3 things that I think we need to focus on and improve. And before I talk about these, let me remind you that this after-action report is the city's after-action report. It is not the county's. It is not the fire district's. It's not Green Mountain Falls or Colorado Springs. It's the city of Woodland Park. So the top 3 things to improve. Maps. Maps are key. Maps communicate a ton. A picture says 1,000 words. A map tells you whether or not your life is going to be affected or not. So maps need to be improved, particularly those that relate to evacuation and pre-evacuation areas. Geographical boundaries are difficult. Fires know no boundaries between city limits and county and the Forest Service or other communities. But we need to be able to communicate so that people who live on the north side of Aspen Garden Way know whether they're being evacuated, or is it the people on the south side of Aspen Garden Way. And I use that as an example. But those kinds of communications weren't very clear. and we need to do a better job with that. We also need to increase resources at our front desk here at City Hall to help answer questions from the citizenry and to have accurate information for them to answer those questions. We found that immediately, starting Monday morning after the fire had been going for a day and a half, we were inundated with calls. And we flooded the front desk with folks who could help, but we needed more so that we could make sure that we could give good answers in a quick time to our community. The other minor thing that we need to improve was our evacuation marking system. Because we had 3 or 4 different entities in the different neighborhoods, we had 3 or 4 different marking systems for evacuation. There are some FEMA marking systems that it's an X and it shows how many people live in the house, how many people have evacuated, how many pets are there, how many people are dead that are found in the house. We didn't have any of those marked, thankfully. But we also had different systems being used, and they weren't consistent. The chief and I had a discussion as I drove through during the evacuation, and we determined that it was not worth the effort to come back and remark everything to try to get it straight. We knew that a follow-on action would still cover the community, so we didn't necessarily need to spend energy to interpret those and remark them. But I promise you, well, I shouldn't make a promise that I don't have direct control over. We will do our best to make sure that the marking system is consistent so that folks know what that's all about. Those were our high 3 and our low 3. Mayor, at this time, I would like to suggest that we accept questions from council. We'll do our best to answer those. Council and audience, one of the things I'd ask you to do is if you have a question or a point, please we'll make a note of it. Let's not solve the problem tonight. And if we hear the question or the concern once, let's not repeat it again. We've got it being recorded, and we'll go from there. So that's my suggestion, Mayor. And for council and the audience, if you have a question that specifically relates to something in the report, if you'll tell us the page number, Kip will scroll down to that page. If you tell them the item number, we'll get it on the screen so that folks here and at home can see what your question or concern is all about.
And if you have questions, we'd ask you to come up to the podium.
Yes, please.
And ask the question. It'd be good if you'd. It's not a council meeting. It'd be good to tell your name and your address, where you live, and then ask your question, and we'll move from there. I'll just add one thing to what David was saying about the marking system, because a lot of people don't understand that. That marking system is so important as we do evacuation, so we know the status of each residence. And because we come back and do second checks when we do an evacuation, we always want to know the status. Is there somebody in the house that decided not to evacuate? Have they evacuated? Those types of things. And that way we can know that by just driving through the neighborhood. So that marking system is very important. And having supplies available, you don't normally think of Highway 24 being closed and that you could always go down to Colorado Springs and get additional things. But when that route is closed and you've visited the hardware store and Walmart and everywhere else to get a few things that you might need, in this case paint, and you've purchased all of that, it becomes a bit of a challenge. So, David, I'll let you actually be kind of an MC moderator for this, and we'll go ahead and start with council if they've got any questions or comments.
Please.
Well, David and for the rest of the staff, thank you very much for putting this together. In fact, I brought my own copy of the national guidelines because I think this is key for all small municipalities to have a consistent guideline that you can go to before, during, and after a crisis or a disaster like we experienced this last summer. Now, with respect to the executive summary, on the three things that went very well, and I agree with those, I'm just concerned about your comment about the Highway Patrol assisting with the evacuation. How can we make that a routine relationship and ensure that that's part of our evacuation plan, that we have called upon their services and they're there beforehand instead of just by accident driving through town?
We can certainly try to do that, Carol, but these are actually were, I think it was 2 or 4 troopers who were moving from a station west of here to a station east of here. So it wasn't in response to a request, and I would suggest to you that State Patrol is absolutely overloaded, and it was just by happenstance that we had those two. We do have mutual aid agreements with different entities, and I'm going to let Bob address that a bit more in detail.
They were fully committed to other missions, and evacuating individual cities is not one of those missions. That's our responsibility. In different settings where we wouldn't have a closed highway and they wouldn't be committed to the highway mission, for instance during the Hayman fire, then we were able to ask for help and we got it from the state. But during this particular one, it was just there was a short break in the action for them, and they were driving through our town and they decided to help.
Is the relationship such though that there are existing agreements, or do we have to request those things?
We have to request it, and in general, any request agreements we make are going to be just what we had here. If we aren't doing our primary job and we have people left over, but their focus is the highway by state law and by our Constitution.
Mm-hmm. And the highway in this case was critical.
Right, they're not a state police agency.
Later in the plan on page 19, you talk about our disaster planning. Do we have a written plan? And I am embarrassed to say that I don't know if we do. And if we do, is there an evacuation annex?
Since the 70s, and we have updated it significantly since then.
Is that available online, or is that? No.
It's not. I suspect it could be. It's quite voluminous. But it is something that it was easily pulled off the shelf and reviewed. We have an emergency manager, Sergeant Jim Halloran, who's quite comfortable and confident with the document, as is the chief and the deputy chief, for that matter. I don't know if there's anything in the plan that is that shouldn't be online. I just don't know the real value of it.
The general plan could be online. There might be some specific incident action plans for contingencies that we might not want to discuss, but most of those could be online.
And I'm really directing this towards an evacuation annex, if there's such a thing, with the maps. If maps were critical, and we could have posted an evacuation map as part of our evacuation plan, I could see that being posted online, if not the entire plan.
But the evacuation routings will be different for each emergency.
Sure.
So they have to be created during the emergency that you're having. We have plans to get down Highway 24, plans for 67, and plans to do other things. And we could make all of them available, but it would be less confusing if we gave general concepts and then published the plan during the emergency.
I agree.
That would
there's only a few ways out of town, and so there's really two components of an evacuation plan: the routes out and who goes. And the routes out are pretty clear, and those were communicated where those different routes were closed. The part that I was really speaking of was the maps within the city of what areas were to be evacuated. Those we couldn't hope to have those prepared with all the contingencies that exist. What we need to have prepared, though, are some base maps that are better. We found that we needed maps that had street names on them so that if someone calls up and says, I'm on Misty Pine Circle, am I evacuated? Well, I knew that they weren't, but the folks at the front desk needed to be able to look at a map and say, oh, no, you're okay. You're on the west side of town, you're fine.
Our maps were created for the use of the police department, and the officers know where all the streets are. We didn't give enough forethought to the idea that we would have city staff that generally didn't work with maps answering questions for the public.
Okay.
So we were looking at where we're going to send our officers and how we're going to deploy that force to rapidly notify people and move them. And we should have looked at some extra stuff, too.
Okay.
One of the things that was a difficulty in evacuation was because of the fire's movement, there were decisions that were made on a minute-by-minute basis about the opening and closing of state highways. And there were also a few things that made it difficult. For instance, the mayor was talking about going down to pick up supplies. Depending upon how the fire was behaving, we could drive down, but we might not be able to drive back because the fire moved a bit. Much like warfare, you can't count on what the enemy's doing.
Okay. I don't have any other questions relevant to the executive summary, but as we close up the discussion, I do have a question about what action do you want council to take relevant to the after-action report?
Okay, we'll bring that up at the end then. Thank you.
And while Carol was asking about, the kind of emergency action plan that we have in place, I will say that I was very impressed as mayor. Keeping in mind, I'd been on city council for 2 years, had been mayor for about 3 months when the fire occurred, and we talked about this before, but the fact that we could pull it off the shelf on Saturday, start looking at it, reviewing anything that we could start tweaking as a result of where the fire was, kind of the nature of the fire. Very impressed. And without getting into any specifics, I will tell you that all municipalities do not have such a plan sitting on the shelf that's been updated and worked by the staff. And in fact, we have shared our plan with others. And even some towns that had to evacuate had a plan, but it ended up the person that knew about it was out of town and they had difficulty. So just, and what I'm really trying to convey here is that our staff had a pretty good handle on things, and it really made a big difference.
What other questions from council can we answer before we ask for questions from the audience here today?
I have one. I'm not too sure you can answer this, but you mentioned the lack of, we have pretty limited evacuation routes here. We got Highway 24 and 67, and we're surrounded by national forest, essentially. Is there like a doomsday scenario where, if that fire is spread and shuts off both those highways, are we just doomed? Are we screwed? I mean, what?
Well, I suppose if you carried that statement to its extreme, then we are. But I don't want to be quoted in the paper as saying that would be true.
Do we fly C-130s in and evacuate people in that case, or what?
But here's what we experienced during the Hayman fire, and even during portions of the Waldo Canyon fire. There are more ways out of this town than you might think. Rampart Range Road, that would not have been a good choice.
No.
But for the fire to completely surround the city would mean that it would have come through the city.
Yeah.
What we found during the Hayman fire is when it was approaching from the northwest and it was coming to the southeast, additional resources were put into effect around Woodland Park. The same thing held true for the Waldo Canyon fire. So what I learned to trust during the Hayman fire, and I had a battalion of combat engineers up here with dozers, scrapers, and loaders ready to build a fire break around the city. We didn't need that because the resources come. We're at the end of the food chain when it comes to information getting to us. That's why it's so important to be talking to our fire chief, because he has a finger on that pulse. And I don't want to think about that scenario, but there are other ways out of town, and it would be a significant catastrophic event for all those to be cut off.
Well, imagine you'd probably make an evacuation decision way before that would occur. So, if, for instance, Highway 24 is closed, you're going to say, we may need to evacuate now and use 67.
One of the beautiful things of this particular evacuation is it was called during the middle of the day. It was 11:40 a.m. People were already on pre-evac, and truly, by 2:15, we were done. Now, that was only a third of the city. Had we had to do more, we would have just kept rolling through. And I suspect we would have been done by 6 o'clock at night. And we wanted to do it during the daytime, not at night. So the citizens here have a great understanding of that.
We also had a significant number of people that had particular difficulties to deal with on their own that made the decision to leave ahead of time because of arrangements for people in their family that were disabled, because of animals, because of just I'd rather be somewhere else and not have to worry about it. But quite a few people left, and most of those people told somebody, so we didn't spend a lot of time looking for them.
And going back to Gary's comment about, that's the whole thing. We hope we don't get into that kind of scenario. We hope during that week very much we didn't want to, once it happened on Tuesday with the blowout down Queens Canyon into Colorado Springs into Mountain Shadows, we were wanting to avoid that. They were also, but we very much, that's the reason we were staying on top of it. And the whole plan is if we're doing the right things, and unless Mother Nature really throws us a bad curve, our plan is to make all those decisions in time that we could get everybody out and do it safely. Keep in mind, for example, sometimes you don't have that control. Manitou Springs, they were evacuated during the middle of the night at like 1 o'clock in the morning, so on Sunday morning. So, sometimes those things are out of your control, and you do what you have to do, but our goal is to stay on top of it and avoid those kind of situations.
Any other questions from council before we move to the audience? Yes, Terry.
Not really, David. I'd like to compliment the city staff, and I don't know if it's appropriate or inappropriate. Tyler was very much involved in that. Could we ask him to come up here and take a seat to answer the questions from the audience?
Sure.
Get up there, Tyler. But
Tyler, we might see how you like it up here.
Tyler, along
I wasn't going to give you my seat.
Tyler, along with
Absolutely.
with all the staff, was very, very much involved in this, and but I greatly appreciate the information stream, and we had, especially working with something we'd never worked with before. It was new to everybody, and the job that everybody did, I think, was absolutely fabulous. And I thought it was really great because the toughest question I had to answer was to a person that came to my office, and he says, they threw me out of my house. And I says, it's okay. I'm out of mine. Our city manager is out of his. And come to think of it, Tyler lives in the evacuated area too, so our fire chief's not in home either. And that's all it took. They said, if the fire chief is evacuated, then I guess I can go too. So anyway, thank you all very, very much.
Let's move on to see what questions we might have from the audience, questions or comments. I will ask you to come to the podium so that if anyone is listening at home, they hear your question. We can also get it recorded. And I'd ask that you tell us your name and your address, too, so we have a kind of a frame of reference of where you live in the city. That might help us answer questions a bit better. Yes, sir.
I think that guy's sat up here a few times.
I don't know this guy.
I haven't stood up here very often. Ken Matthews, 420 Sunny Glen Court, and we were evacuated, as was our business. And I certainly appreciate the efforts of the staff and the city and everyone involved. Just a couple of comments. One of the most confusing things I heard during the evacuation was not knowing exactly who was evacuated. And I don't know if it's practical, because I think the chief makes a good point. Every disaster dictates certain things. But if we had some predetermined districts in the city, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, or A, B, C, D, or whatever, so everybody knew they were in District A, or whatever, that they would know, if you call for it, that they're evacuated. How often we split up the city to evacuate obviously will depend upon, the severity of the case. But if that's practical, I think that's something that should be looked into so that we all know in advance what district we're in. So you put it out on the radio and say, this district's, evacuated, or should be. A couple other quick comments, nothing new, but I think it needs to be pushed a little bit by the city, and that's what individuals can do. Things we've all heard. Fire mitigation around your home, especially those of us like Mr. Brevetto who live near National Forest and you have a big potential fire area behind you. There are many things you can do. And what brought this to light recently, and since the Waldo Canyon fire, many insurance companies are looking at this very closely. And many of you may have already heard this, that there are some people that are being told, different companies, that unless you cut these 2 or 3 trees down or whatever, we're not going to insure you. So I think we need to be proactive, as, say, Jim Ignatius was, in getting the city protected. We need to be a little responsible for our own property, and whether it's clearing brush, keeping firewood away from the side of the home, whatever the case may be. There's all kinds of things, and we've all heard them. But we need to do them. in our city. And that's an individual thing, not a city responsibility, I understand, but I think the city could urge that a little bit. It's nothing the city can do for us, unfortunately, but I think it's something that we need to do and do religiously. And in the event of another event like this, we'll all be a little better protected. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And Mr. Mayor, what I'd like to do is we'll take everybody's comments.
Yeah, that's good.
That way we get them all, and if we have time before a council meeting starts at 7, we'll go about answering them. Yes, Jane.
And even if we can't answer them here, they're being noted for.
Jean Guerin, 130 Red Rock Court. I was actually out of the country when this fire came, but my daughter, who was house sitting for me, was caught in it. She kind of was one of those that panicked and left, even though she didn't have to. But I do want to compliment the city very much on how it was handled. For Dave's follow-ups, the meetings, all of these things, I think you did a fabulous job. I had to call at least once, and it was just great. Got a quick answer. I just can't give you enough praise for it. But I do want to follow up on the previous gentleman in terms of community, what the people can do. For many people, to do the mitigations that's necessary is inordinately expensive. I'm sure you are aware of this. Where I live, I also have pretty recalcitrant neighbors who probably are not educated. While the city itself cannot do things, perhaps the city can sponsor grants or other kinds of outside funding that might make it easier for people who are on limited incomes to do what's necessary. Perhaps the city can foster community or local group meetings in different parts of the county or parts of the city. The whole area around me is a red zone. In fact, I've actually been told, why bother mitigating, because it's not going to make any difference, when I look around, when the whole context of my neighborhood is considered. So I urge the city to investigate some of these other things that may not cost them a lot of money, but may be able to help in this community mitigation effort. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean.
Very good.
Who else has a question? Yes, Debbie.
Hi, Debbie Miller. I work at 210 East Midland at the Chamber office. I'd like to bring your attention to page 9. This will address what I'm about to share with you. We too, first of all, I want to say thank you for everything to everyone involved in this and the efforts put on by everybody. And we fielded literally hundreds of calls during that time as well. But at 11:31, you'll see where it says stand by to evacuate. We fielded tons of calls with confusion over the word standby and confusion over the word pre-evacuation. And because media was coming out of the springs and things were they were pre-evacuation, we were hearing from Teller County pre-evac, we were hearing from Woodland Park standby. That caused a sense of confusion to the people who called us. So for future, one terminology may help us in the future. Thank you.
And I'll comment on that at the end.
Okay.
If we could get everybody's comments, Mayor. Thank you. Who else? Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, while he's coming up, the one thing with that is we even, we can standardize and use the same terminology, but it doesn't mean the press, not knocking you guys, but I mean TV stations and everything, what words they're going to use. So that becomes an overall issue for communications in the big community.
Yes, sir.
I'm Paul Scheck-Snyder, 175 Piney Point Lane. Overall, considering the nature of the event, I thought the evacuation went well. I thought there was good information available on the internet, which was primarily where myself and my family were checking. I just have a question going forward. What's the plan for getting Rampart Range Road reopened?
Well, we actually have been in contact with the Forest Service and some of the recreation areas up there. I don't have an answer for you. We've heard several things, but I don't feel comfortable repeating those because I haven't gotten those officially. I can tell you that we think it's critical to have Rampart Range reopened as an ingress-egress route in case Highway 24 is closed because of some flooding and debris and washout. What I can tell you is that the Colorado Department of Transportation has their emergency response teams standing by. They have monitors in the burn area, and when there's more than a quarter of an inch of rain, no matter what's happening on Highway 24, they're going to send out resources prepared to clear 24. So that should give you a degree of confidence that they're watching that very closely. We would love to have a quarter of an inch of rain, but that is their trigger point. Okay. But we also know that if there's a 1 inch rain, for example, it will take them a long time to get that road cleared off. So we think it's important from an economic vitality perspective and from an emergency reaction perspective to get Rampart Range Road opened all the way from Garden of the Gods to just north of Woodland Park.
Okay, and when would we expect to see a real plan for that?
Well, again, we've drafted a letter for the mayor's signature to send to the Forest Service saying this is critical to us, but we think we might hear something within a week or two, just based on some rumblings that we're hearing. So when we know something, so will you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Others? Cord.
Cord Prettyman, 1231 Shar West Drive in Woodland Park. A couple of ideas. I've been in far too many wildfires for my young years. After 27 years in Southern California, I had 4 that I was in and 2 in the 15 years I've been here. One of the things that occurred in Southern California that we might give some thought to was that after a number of wildfires, they started identifying properties that were high risk and notifying homeowners of that, or general areas that were high risk, so that the awareness was brought up. And what brought this to mind was I was at a meeting of all the residents in the Forest Edge area on Tuesday night, and we had a gentleman there from the Forest Service, and he informed us that our area along that ridge there is considered the highest fire danger area in the city, and that was a wake-up call for a lot of people there. So I know we have a codes enforcement person that goes around. I don't know if something like that could be created, that once a year we went around and let homeowners know. I wouldn't suggest, Southern California being what it is, they would give you notice and then 30 days to take care of the problem, and then they come and do it for you and then send you the bill. So I'm not suggesting that, but I'm thinking that raising the awareness, we all live in the same community together, and we see how close we came to it going up, in its entirety. So something to think about there. And I'd like to add my thanks to Mayor Dave Curley, City Manager David Buttery, Curley, and the city staff, because you guys did an incredible job. The communication was good, and the professionalism and the calmness that you delivered the information with. You may have been petrified, but it didn't come across. And so I don't think you should be surprised that the evacuation went so well, because I think that was a reflection of the tone that the city set. And thank you very much for that. It was much appreciated.
Thank you, Cord. I do want to make one comment, Cord, about your statements. I was at the same meeting of Friends of Forest Edge, and I'll talk about that process in just a minute because it's a great thing. But the gentleman who made the comment about the highest priority was actually a Teller County Planning Commissioner, and he was making reference to the larger plan that Jim Ignatius was part of. What's it called, Sally?
Community Wildfire Protection Plan.
Thank you. And in that plan, there are numerous zones, and they're color-coded. And in your neighborhood is a red zone. Jean's neighborhood is a red zone. Meadow Park is a red zone. There are numerous red zones. So it wasn't a Forest Service person who said it was the highest priority. It is one of the many red zones that surround the city. His impression as a Teller County Planning Commissioner was that it was the highest priority. So I think it's worthy of that clarification for the media coverage. Thank you. Who's next? Who has a question, comment? Please. This was public. Yes, sir.
My name is Kevin Carter. I live on 955 Lafayette.
Yeah, could you repeat it into the mic, because that way it gets on the record and everybody out there can hear you. Thank you.
All right, my name's Kevin Carter. I live on 955 Lafayette. My concerns were during the evacuation and pre-evacuation and stuff that the city, at some point, some of the gas stations were running low on fuel. And if that issue was addressed, or if you were looking into something like that to where Highway 24 was shut down and that was the main road for delivery of gas and food supplies. I know when people started to panic and started to worry about their gas and their food, that we were running out. Walmart was running low on certain items, and some of the gas stations were out of gas. Also, the fire, when it took out the power line going up Rampart to the pumps and things like that, and if there was a concern that if this happened again, that if more of the power lines were burned down and we were out of power, if that was something that was being addressed as far as backup power and things like that to the city. Also, as far as evacuation, when we did start evacuating and you did evacuate certain parts of the city, if the problem came up that you had to evacuate more people at one time, if the routes were going to be able to handle the crowd that you are evacuating. I also work for Colorado Springs Utilities. I work for the power company, and they did have a lot of power problems that we were involved in during the fire when it jumped the canyons and stuff. And they also did have traffic problems when they were trying to evacuate, that the fire came over that canyon so fast that the roads got clogged up and people couldn't evacuate fast enough. And I just want to know if those problems were being looked at and addressed.
And I'll address those when we hear everybody's questions.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments before I start answering some of these? Well, before I begin that, I'd like to see if Tyler has comments he'd like to make. And I'd also want to make sure that we recognize Debbie Miller and the work that she did for the businesses, for processes for helping them, processes for communication. So, Debbie, if you have something else you'd like to add after Tyler, I'd be happy to hear that.
And before Tyler, I'd like to go ahead and mention, too, we talked about the Teller County Sheriff, but I'll say it was broader than that, the work with the Teller County in general, particular with Cheryl Decker as the county commissioner, as administrator, and working as the information officer was a key part of our meetings. And then also what the commissioner's doing. Normally a commissioner was, going down to some of the meetings in the springs and some things like that. So we all worked as a team, and it was all that local leadership. Tyler?
A few questions, comments that I have initially was, we learned a lot from the Hayman fire when that came through our city and the neighborhoods around us. And what we've realized from that is it's not just one entity that's going to take care of the massive problem. It's a number of entities coming together doing that. I think that's really what we saw on this fire, is all the entities that we had working to do the specialized things that they do, I think is what you've seen as a result of things going very well. We were doing the fire part of it, the city was doing their part of it, the police department was doing their part of it, instead of us trying to do it all, leaving on one agency. The collaboration between all entities that were involved, I think, went very well. And I think we learned a lot from the Hayman fire doing that. That's really the biggest comment I've got. Besides some of the questions, I think we can answer some of those too. So. Okay,
well, let's get into those then. We did have one question or comment from our listening audience. One, technology's good, but and there's a compliment, but then there's a suggestion. Consider budgeting a seasonal fuels mitigation crew to work through city property dispersed throughout the town, and I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. To answer Ken's question about districts for evacuation areas, certainly worthy of consideration. We did make some announcements based on subdivisions and neighborhoods, similar concept, so we can look at that and see if it makes sense. Individual mitigation, huge. It's huge. And that's what Scott Lord is referring to here, is individual mitigation around people's homes. Friends of Forest Edge is a grassroots group from the Forest Edge neighborhoods that came together. They've established a 501c3 as a nonprofit so that they can apply for grants and receive grants for mitigation. They've partnered with the city, with Coalition of the Upper South Platte, with Northeast Teller County Fire Protection District to remove some trees in public areas. Our public works crew has probably removed over 100 trees in some of the green spaces that are in those neighborhoods. It'll make a healthier forest. It also provides great fire mitigation. Friends of Forest Edge, already if you're living in those neighborhoods, they've got work days and they've got chipper days. So they've got people that will come through and help remove trees free of charge, and they'll also have people that will come through and do the chipping as well. So that's a great thing for any neighborhood to pursue. There's great information from our Forest Service, from our Natural Resources Conservation Service. They're willing to come house to house to help people decide what trees does it make sense for you to remove from in your yard to help protect your house. There's a great reason for doing that. One, when the firefighters come to your house, they do a triage. They're making an assessment on what can be done and what can't be done. The more you do, the better you make their decision-making process. Tyler, would you like to comment on that?
You're absolutely correct. The more you do at your house, taking your firewood, we heard that, away from your decks, keeping the vegetation around your houses away from it. There's a website out there. It's firewise.org you can go to, and you can find on there the defensible space zones that we like to see people use. Of course, people move to the mountains to have trees around their homes. In a fire situation, that's not so good. So you can go to that and get your house defendable for us when we get there. It's easier for us to do a little bit of work at your house because there's not a lot of us and there's a lot of homes. So if we have to go and just do a few things at your home to clean it up a little bit, we have a better chance of being able to save that house when the fire does come through. And it gives us a chance to move on to more houses. So that's one of the items on that. And then when you were talking about the zones or the districts to be able to evacuate, we use a term called trigger points in our line of work. And when a fire is progressing in an area, we set trigger points based on where houses or people are. When that trigger point is hit, then that evacuation or pre-evacuation might start. So that might help in that type of thing. It depends on, in the city of Woodland Park, being it's surrounded by national forests on three sides, really. If it's on one side, there's always going to be evacuation zone coming from that side first. But it depends on wind directions and topographical the topos. There's a lot of things that go into when we set trigger points. How fast the fire is moving, what's it in, what's the weather going to be doing for the next couple of days. So there's a lot of things that we got to do to make those trigger points available to us to set them standards so we know when it hits this point, then we're going to do a pre-evac and there's an evac going to go on. So that's kind of how we go about that.
Thanks, Tyler. Gene, you talked about city involvement, community involvement, possibility for grants. I talked about that with the Friends of Forest Edge. That's a model that can be replicated throughout the city. Debbie, you talked about consistency of terms. We actually, as part of the after action report, we did a glossary of terminology. That's something we need to do early on. That's a lesson learned, so that we can get those terms out there so people understand exactly what they mean. So that's something that we absolutely can do. Paul and I, for the life of me, he's gone. No, he's back there. I didn't get your last name. I'm sorry, but I think we answered your question. When we find out about Rampart Range Road, we're going to let the world know. Cord, you talked about identifying high-risk properties. There are agencies that can help with that. It may not be the city, but the Forest Service, NRCS, all those folks would come and certainly help. And I put down... Yes?
Excuse me. With that, I think on the Teller County website, you can look up that CWPP, and it'll show your area on there and what color coding and what all that means.
And I had a note here that said TCPC, and I have no idea what that means anymore. Oh, Teller County Planning Commission. I made that correction to your statement. Thank you. Mr. Carter, you had several great comments. The city was never out of fuel. There were a couple of times when we had rumors that were running wild that there was no gasoline in the city. It was never true. There were some stations that were out of high octane or low or some grade, but there was always fuel within the city. That doesn't cause the issue to go away. There needs to be contingency plans for fuel trucks to get up here. They were making their trips. They were coming, I don't know from where, but they were coming in from the west side of town. I know it was Manweiler who was coming in to service all the loafing jugs. But that took them a couple of days to get into process. One of our tasks will be, from a logistics perspective, is to figure out what those communication systems are so that we will know what the resupply will be. One of the things we found out in the public meetings was that people really wanted to know about their mail, and they wanted to know about groceries, and I would add to that fuel as well. So we're going to make that, if we do this again, which I hope I never have to, we will make that a part of the daily briefings. Here's where you can get fuel. Here's where lodging's available. Those kinds of service announcements. Groceries the same way. Walmart closed. Safeway did not. City Market did not. They were being resupplied again. Routes through the back coming in from the west. The power line to the pumps. The good news is, and see, you're smarter than most people because you know what's up there. There's one main line and then there's an alternate line. So you're right. One of the main lines was compromised, but the alternate, which comes in from a completely different direction, was not. The city's pump station was not on the line that was harmed. And early on in the process, our utilities director and chief water operator and the fire chief drove up there to see what needed to be done to protect that pump station's infrastructure. You're absolutely right. If there's an event that causes the primary to go out and the secondary to go out, we have to figure out what we need to do from generators and that kind of thing. And we'll be looking into those things. Phasing of the evacuation and capacity of routes. When we were faced with the Hayman fire, it was going to be a total evacuation of the city, but done in a phased approach. We would start in Sunnywood, we would have come into Valley View, we would have come into Paint Pony, and we would have made our way from the northwest through the southeast. And that's how we would have released the neighborhoods. Now, people leave on their own accord, and because there are the few routes in and out, there would have been congestion. But that's one of the reasons why we looked at an evacuation of the east side, and then we set the other portions of town on pre-evac so that we could have a better control of that evacuation. Had we been doing the evacuation of the entire city, Colorado State Patrol would have jumped in and helped us. Doesn't help the capacity of the roadways because it necks down and divide. And so there's only so much that you can put through that straw. But we do think about those things, and we think about how we phase the release of the neighborhoods. I think the chief, you had a comment?
Well, I was going to say in response to Carol Harvey's question about the patrol, that's not an agreement, but that's in the state's highway emergency plan. Okay. And their function is to be up here to control traffic or wherever the problem is. And those troopers were up here for that purpose, and the traffic congestion they were concerned about didn't materialize, and that's how they were able to help us. But it's also why we can't count on them to help us, because they have a primary mission. And it's not an agreement with us, just a plan that we're aware of, and they're aware of our plans.
So we need to wrap up. You asked the question, what do I need council to do? With this report, I don't think anything, unless you go through it and you have other questions or comments you'd like to make and have us incorporate that. But I don't need any action with this. The actions are with the staff. There are things that will affect you, some of the things that relate to scheduling and things like that. But right now, I don't know that I need any feedback from you other than other comments that you might think of.
No, aside from the fact that the emergency action plan, the parts of it that are applicable, practical, that can be posted, I would like to see them posted simply as a citizen.
Sure.
Because when you talk about terminology, a glossary that was available to the public that defined standby versus pre-evacuation would be useful before the next event.
Yes, ma'am. Understand. Yeah, Ken.
Can I make one quick point?
Please. Yes, please.
And we're going to wrap up in about 1 minute, so that we have a few minutes before council begins.
One thing I meant to mention, and it's not so much a city problem or issue, although they can make people aware of it, is our businesses in the community. And I think Debbie in particular, with all the businesses the chamber represents, they need to have a contingency plan. Where are you going to go if you're evacuated? We were fortunate to have some friends that let us move our business into their conference room, set up computers, move the computers. Are you able to do that? Think through how you would move out of your business. And I think all our businesses in the city need to think about a contingency plan for evacuation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Debbie? And then I've got my final wrap-up comment, and then we'll turn it to the mayor.
Okay.
One quick comment. We learned during this that social media served as a two-edged sword. Mm-hmm. And we learned this throughout the region, and we learned it throughout the state. And that was the fact it was great to be able to get information out quickly, but the other component of that was the horrific pictures that were posted. And we spent tons of time surfing Facebook pages, contacting people, asking them to take that off of their Facebook page, because that gets spread worldwide. And those were the calls we were getting saying, we don't want to come to your area, it's burnt, and these types of things. So be cognizant when you go to post a picture. It's very personal to you at that point, but when you post a picture on a personal Facebook, we ask businesses not to do that. Just be cognizant that that has a life of its own when it goes out. So social media served us well, but it also caused some issues as well.
My wrap-up comments would be my thanks to our professional staff who kept me apprised of things that were going on, the cooperation with our elected officials who allowed me to execute my job, the partnership with the fire district, the county, search and rescue, the chamber was just phenomenal. At the end of the day, what our citizens need from us is to feel safe and secure, and I think that's what we provided for this community during the Waldo Canyon fire. Dave?
Thanks, Dave, and I will just add to that real quickly. Obviously, that week was pretty unique for me as the mayor and David as the city manager, and as I think everybody that was around. We were pretty much joined at the hip that week, from morning to night, and together made decisions on things that at a high level need to be done, and that I would go do, and that he would do in running the city. And also, I would like to compliment our city council members. We knew where everybody was. We were in contact in case there was some kind of a political decision that needed to be made. We could poll the city council members and in contact. And just so you'll know, that's not always a give me in every municipality, but it did. That's the way we were here, and I think it was a very good model for doing things. I thank you all for coming. I would tell everyone that's out there, if you have any questions, David, who can they send them to if they have some additional?
They can email them. Actually, what we have on our Facebook page and our website is Suzanne LeClaire's email address, or send them directly to me at dbuttery@city-woodlandpark.org.
So if you have it, the AAR is posted. The link is on the website. And if you have any questions, additional comments, those that are out there and see this maybe after the fact, feel free to send those in. It's appreciated. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. And let's hope we never have to deal with this again. But if we do, let's be prepared. Thank you very much.